Revenge with Karen.
You sure this is the final version? I asked, squinting at the Q4 ledger Greg had just slapped on my desk like it owed him money. The numbers danced around like drunk raccoons, aggressive, messy, and obviously hiding something. Line 47C listed an asset reallocation from restricted capital reserves to discretionary operations with no date, no memo, and no signature. That line item hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. Greg leaned in like a smug weasel in a polyester tie, reeking of Axe body spray and entitlement. "It's budget season, Barbara," he said, voice soaked in condescension. "We needed your files for formatting. You know, presentation stuff. Formatting? Presentation? I've been buried in asset compliance since BlackBerrys were cutting edge. I know what a reclassified fund looks like when it's been laundered through a spreadsheet." Greg's budget adjustment smelled like dollar store cover-up spray over rotting meat. That moment was the spark. Not a full explosion yet, but the unmistakable stench of burning wire behind the walls. You don't see the fire, but you know it's coming. Before I go further, hey, quick pause. If you're already nodding along thinking, damn, I've worked with a Greg too, do me a solid. Tap that like button and subscribe. Seriously. 95% of folks never do. But it really keeps the engine running over here. And the team gets all giddy like Greg when he finds unmonitored petty cash. All right, back to the hellscape. I didn't respond to his smirk. Just took the printout, walked back to my little corner in the compliance cubicle farm, and opened my laptop with the same reverence most folks reserve for sacred texts. My job title was Senior Operations Specialist. What I really did was catch the stupid before it metastasized. Or at least, I tried to when they let me. But lately, things were shifting. Slowly, like mold behind drywall. The vendor dashboard had inexplicably locked me out last Thursday. A shared Google Drive folder I'd curated since 2018 had been archived due to redundancy. And 3 internal audit requests I submitted in November had been rerouted, without my name on them, through Greg's new intern, who once asked if a depreciation schedule meant her gym plan. I sent a soft ping to IT. Nothing. Sent a follow-up to legal, just noticing some inconsistencies. Please advise, the usual neutral speak. No reply. HR gave me the "have you tried asking Greg directly?" treatment, as if Greg hadn't just implied I was too ancient to keep up with Excel. What they didn't know, what Greg definitely didn't know, was that I built this system. I wrote the vendor protocols they now pretend don't exist. I designed the very matrix Greg was now trying to game. And back in 2019, when we renewed our acquisition protection contract with our largest software partner, I helped draft a clause so obscure it required footnotes just to explain the logic. Clause 14D. At the time, it was just belt and suspenders legalese. A failsafe, napkin sketch of mine that legal thought was cute, but maybe too nuclear. But they'd signed it. Every version since had carried it over, buried in PDF appendices and forgotten SharePoint folders. And now, with Q4 projections bloated like Greg's ego, that clause wasn't theoretical anymore. It was breathing. Watching. By the time Greg held his little kingdom hostage in front of the board with optimistic forecasts, I'd already printed out the final signed version of that clause and stored it offsite. I didn't trust the cloud. Clouds evaporate. But hard drives don't forget. Every discrepancy I spotted was quietly logged. Every deleted email, archived from my private BCC, every spreadsheet mistake, screen recorded, timestamped, and labeled. I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. And the more they tried to edge me out, the more I realized they weren't just sloppy. We're breaking the system I had built. And I don't do quiet destruction. I do silent enforcement. My login failed at 8:07 a.m., not a crash, not a timeout. A clean little message blinking like a smug middle finger, access revoked. Contact your administrator. I sipped my coffee, burnt, vending machine garbage, and stared at the screen like it had just insulted my mother. 2 folders gone, vendor reconciliation logs, and the Q3-Q4 rollover archive, both labeled with my initials, now locked behind Greg's digital gatekeeping. I walked over to his office. Door wide open, of course, because Greg believed in performative transparency. He was leaning back in his chair, watching some influencer on TikTok explain EBITDA like she was reciting spell work. His intern, a walking French manicure named Kylie, snorted every few seconds like it made her smarter. I knocked once, dry as a lawyer's toast. Morning, Greg got locked out of my asset folders. He didn't even pause the video. Yeah, we needed your files for budget, he said, waving his hand like he was dismissing a bad smell. Kylie's consolidating everything for the partner packet. Makes things more streamlined, like a power drill through the kneecap. I clenched my jaw and nodded. I assume you've mirrored the permission structure. Asset reclass protocols, vendor freeze triggers, compliance appendices. Greg blinked like I'd asked him to solve for X in Mandarin. Look, Barb, don't overthink it. It's just budget stuff. Kylie's got it under control. Kylie smiled like a shark smelling blood in bathwater. By noon, 3 of my regular weekly reports had been rerouted to central finance for audit prep. One of them, the vendor payment delay matrix, was showing edits I hadn't made. Someone had smoothed out the 14-day float into a flexible 30-day cushion, which, if reported, would make us look like we had $2.3 million in liquidity we did not have. I forwarded it to myself with the subject line, "Cool, let's all go to jail." I tried legal again. No reply. They'd gone radio silent since December, ever since their lead counsel got poached by a firm with a bigger espresso machine and fewer lawsuits. HR was neck-deep in team-building vision statements and hadn't responded to my flagged concerns in over 2 weeks. I even looped in procurement, who forwarded my email right back to me with a smiley face and the phrase, "Not our wheelhouse, but good luck." I didn't have a seat at the table anymore. Greg did. He was gorging himself on the catered lies he'd seasoned himself. Then came the board meeting announcement. Full finance presentation next Tuesday, the VP barked during the Monday staff call, his voice muffled by whatever microwave meal he was shoveling in. Greg'll walk through the projections. Should be a breeze. Greg gave me a thumbs up from across the room. A real smug, can you believe the switch kind of grin. He knew I'd be there, silent, watching him present data I wasn't allowed to see, built off files I'd created, tweaked without audit trails, wrapped up in a PowerPoint thick with sparkline graphs and corporate gaslighting. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being erased. They didn't want my eyes on anything anymore, not because I was wrong, but because I knew too damn much. My job, at its core, was to make sure the numbers matched the reality. And now reality was being rewritten with bullet points, color-coded lies, and a budgeting intern who once asked if capital reserves meant leftover pens. I went home that night and pulled out a thumb drive I hadn't touched in 4 years. Inside it, contract versions, vendor terms, old compliance snapshots, most of them long since buried under newer revisions and prettier formatting. And one-word doc titled, Clause 14D Final Signed Clean PDF. They had no idea what game they were playing. But I did. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes that Tuesday morning, engine idling, heat blowing stale air into my face, while the world around me pretended to be normal. The HR parking spots were full. The seasonal banner flapping over the entrance said Q for strong. In Comic Sans like this place wasn't hemorrhaging integrity from every vent. I was early. I'm always early. It's the curse of people who actually give a damn. I stared at the badge clipped to my coat, faded plastic, frayed edges. Underneath my name, Senior Ops and Compliance, ESD, 2012. I remember the day they printed it. Greg was still learning how to sort a CSV without asking someone to explain columns versus rows. Back then, people actually came to me for answers. Now, I was the woman they kept out of meetings to simplify the invite list. I wasn't just being left behind. I was being reduced. Still, I didn't want to press the red button just yet. I walked inside, sat through the usual fog of corporate babble, circle back, optics, synergy. Greg cracked a joke about not letting Barb near the forecast files, and the room gave him one of those thin, office laughs that says we know this is rude, but we're too weak to object. After the meeting, I walked straight to HR. Megan, HR partner who wore blazers like she was auditioning for a role in a community theater version of Suits, gave me the practiced smile of someone trained in emotional jiu-jitsu. Hey Barb, everything okay? I've been locked out of key folders. Data's being changed without record, and Greg's team is reclassifying assets that are, let's just say, not protocol. She blinked, paused, tilted her head like I was an overcomplicated IKEA manual. Sounds like a finance thing, doesn't it? It's a compliance thing. That's literally my job. Okay, but maybe it's just growing pains. Budget season is always intense. You know how it is. Maybe loop back after the board meeting, loop back after the house is already on fire. I left before I said something regrettable. Like I hope your next promotion comes with a spine. Next stop, legal, or what was left of it. Marvin, junior associate now in charge of what used to be a 4-person department, offered me a nod that barely qualified as human interaction. When I mentioned the reclassification issue, his face went blank like a loading screen. Are there explicit violations you can name? Section 4.3 of the Vendor Asset Separation Agreement, plus possibly Clause 14D. His eyes twitched. He had heard of it, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. Well, if you think it's worth elevating, I can take a look. Maybe after this quarter ends. After this quarter, I said slowly, the damage is done. He shrugged, already reaching for his coffee like I'd said something about the weather. It's just budgeting, Barb. That phrase landed in my chest like a dull brick. It echoed all the way back to my cubicle, sat with me through lunch, followed me into the empty conference room I used as a war room after hours. It's just budgeting, Barb. Just budgeting, just burying liabilities under jargon, just making fake liquidity look real, just pretending that playing with restricted assets doesn't trigger a clause that could legally detonate everything. Greg's voice, drifting from the break room, snapped me out of it. She used to be sharp, but I think the pace got too fast for her. Poor Barb, she's still sorting by color in Excel. Laughter. Kylie's screechy snort. Greg's smug little chuckle. I opened the compliance archive, dug back through old contracts, vendor renewals, asset terms. I searched for something, anything, some leverage. Then I saw it, buried in a 2019 vendor renewal. A clause I'd personally drafted during one of our most aggressive partner contract rewrites. I remembered the meeting. Legal had rolled their eyes. Finance thought it was overkill. Clause 14D, automatic asset seizure and audit trigger upon detection of misclassified or reallocated restricted capital during a quarterly review or external partner acquisition process. At the time, it was theoretical. A booby trap for fraud, a spider buried in the fine print. I exhaled, slowly. I hadn't lost my edge. They'd just forgotten who wrote the rules. Clause 14D wasn't flashy, wasn't bolded or highlighted or tagged with any fancy metadata. It was wedged in a subsection under partner asset integrity and audit exceptions, nestled between a non-compete clause and a vendor late fee matrix. But I knew its scent. I knew its pulse, because I wrote the damn thing. The words hit me like cold steel. In the event of unreported or misclassified restricted capital during any acquisition-related due diligence or formal quarterly audit, undersigned agrees to automatic relinquishment of affected assets to the investigating partner entity, pending legal review. This includes, but is not limited to, digital infrastructure, associated licensing, escrowed capital, and active contracts related to the breach. In layman's terms, if you cook the books during a deal, the other party gets to eat your lunch and invoice you for dessert. Back in 2019, our firm had been on the receiving end of a near-fraud acquisition attempt. One of our vendors had tried to pull a fast one with delayed liability reporting. I'd spent 2 weeks up to my eyeballs in legalese, rage-tapping my keyboard through black coffee and beef jerky to craft what I called the invisible kill switch. I never thought we'd trigger it ourselves. But Greg with his Dollar Tree charisma and Teflon job security, had tripped it like a toddler finding a bear trap. I checked the timestamps again. Their new asset sheet, version 6.4, auto-saved to the partner presentation drive, had gone live at 10:14 p.m. last night, and it showed the restricted reserves reclassified as surplus reallocation for discretionary investment. No footnotes, no compliance tag, no audit memo. The breach wasn't coming. It had already happened. And with the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow, those numbers would be presented as fact to the acquiring firm. Clause 14D would activate like a lit fuse inside a server rack. No discussion, no delay. But here's the thing about people like Greg. They're too stupid to know when they've already signed their own execution order. I opened up our log monitor. The system Greg's intern thought was just the spreadsheet hallway. Every asset movement, every user action. I traced the edit path. Kylie had uploaded the file, but it was Greg's login that approved it. Sloppy, arrogant, signed, stamped. I backed it all up. Printed hard copies, PDF snapshots, even screen recordings of the audit trail. One set in the office. One set on an encrypted USB I kept hidden in my desk's bottom drawer under expired ginger chews and forgotten sympathy cards. Next, I flagged legal. Not in a dramatic way. Just a casual ping to Marvin, FYI. Noticed we may have technically breached Clause 14D. Might want to review ahead of board review tomorrow. I didn't explain it, didn't rant. I just planted the seed like a quiet bomb and walked away. No reply, of course not. The legal team was buried in merger prep and probably thought I was just grumbling like the ghost of spreadsheets past. But I knew better. I scrolled through the presentation deck Greg had queued for the partners. It was polished. Slick. Page 9 was the ticking time bomb. Operational surplus available for strategic expansion Q1 forecast. $2.6 M, they'd baked the fraud directly into the pitch. Which meant that the moment this deck hit the inbox of the acquiring firm, who had full access to our vendor contracts thanks to due diligence protocols, Clause 14D would wake up like a vengeful ghost with legal teeth. And the best part, it was automatic. No debate. No oops, we'll fix it. No Greg wheezing into a headset trying to buy time. Just seizure, freeze, legal escalation. Every single consequence I'd designed, they had now walked straight into. The rage I'd felt, gone. It evaporated like fog under a heat lamp. All that remained was calm. Surgical calm. Because now this wasn't about proving I was right. It was about timing the detonation. The office always smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee, but that morning had the added stench of nervous ambition, like a job fair inside a gas leak. Greg strutted around in his usual too-tight blazer, grinning like he'd already closed the deal with the acquiring firm. His intern, Kylie, followed him with a stack of printouts and a face that said she thought Helvetica was a financial strategy. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching the system logs. Click by click, I backed up everything. Emails, Slack threads, doc version histories, even the metadata from Kylie's streamlined budget file. I archived the timestamps of Greg's approvals and cross-referenced them against the compliance reporting dashboard. One discrepancy every 3 pages. A pattern so obvious it practically screamed fraud in progress. The whole operation took 3 hours and a decaf-fueled rage that made me type like I was playing whack-a-mole with my fingertips. By the time noon rolled around, it mirrored the most critical evidence into 3 locations. One on the cloud under a fake folder titled Office Potluck 2021, one on a separate external drive at home, and one in a hidden subdirectory in our legacy server that no one under 35 even remembered existed. Redundancy, baby. Then I composed the email to Marvin in legal. Subject: Clause 14D, Vendor Compliance Alignment. Internal use only body. Hi Marvin. Looping this over per our earlier discussions. Noticing asset classifications that may intersect with Clause 14D. No action needed, just flagging for awareness ahead of board meeting. Best be, no panic, no fire alarms, just a faint scent of gunpowder on the breeze. I clicked send. And then I waited. About 30 minutes later, I walked to the kitchenette to grab a tea, and that's when it happened. Greg, mid-laugh, holding court near the Keurig like it was a podium, and he was some kind of spreadsheet messiah. Hey Barb, he called, voice thick with that buttered toast condescension. Still digging through old contracts? Or are you finally updating your resume? A couple chuckles from the peanut gallery. Kylie smiled over the lid of her protein shake like she was watching a sitcom. I didn't blink, just stared him down like I was inspecting a moldy tomato at the store. Still trying to be relevant, Barb? He added, now emboldened, hands in pockets like a playground bully who thinks he just won recess. I took a slow sip of my tea and let silence do the heavy lifting. Then I said, funny thing about relevance, Greg. It tends to show up in the fine print. He blinked, tilted his head like a confused Labrador, and gave a fake laugh as I turned and walked away. Steel. That's what I felt. Not anger, not fear, not even righteous fury. Just clean, cold steel. The kind they forge under pressure. Because I wasn't just prepping evidence, I was setting the stage for a legal auto-trigger Greg didn't even know existed. Like installing a trapdoor in a house you're being evicted from, and then selling the floor plan to the new owners. I double-checked the timestamps again. The updated projections had already been shared with the acquisition team's junior analysts. Clause 14D would trip the moment those numbers hit the inbox of anyone with audit authority. And since Greg had CC'd the lead partner on his 5:42 p.m. review draft, the fuse had been lit. He just didn't hear it sizzling under his smugness. He thought I was bitter. Irrelevant. Done. But the thing about people like Greg is, they never notice the quiet ones until we closed the door behind them. And I was already holding the handle. Boardroom glass was too clean. You could see the reflection of everyone inside without them seeing you, just how Greg liked it. He stood at the front like he was hosting a game show, not selling off a rotting financial foundation in a pressed shirt and a PowerPoint deck. The projector hummed softly. The screen glowed with Greg's curated fiction, Q1 Strategic Leverage Outlook. I sat just outside, in the reception alcove, laptop open, watching the version control feed like a hawk with a law degree. Every file they opened from the shared drive pinged a quiet alert on my end. The board meeting had started at exactly 9:03 a.m. At 9:05, the acquisition partner clicked budget overview merged 6.4 final XLSX. That was the moment. The system didn't scream. It didn't blink red or issue a countdown. It just noted the metadata transfer with a soft ping, like a heartbeat. On the back end, the auto trigger buried in clause 14D began its work, validating the recipient's credentials, confirming breach parameters, initiating contract enforcement protocol via the compliance sync node. Basically, the trap was now live. They had 10 minutes max before the alarms started sounding where it mattered: legal, infrastructure access, account restrictions. But in that short, golden window, got to watch Greg choke on his own confidence. From my seat, I could see it all. The acquiring firm's partners, 3 of them, all in pressed suits and varying levels of interested detachment, nodded as Greg walked them through the projections. "We've unlocked $2.6 million in discretionary surplus," he said, like he hadn't stolen the phrase from a BuzzFeed article on startup jargon. "Giving us maximum agility in Q1. I saw one of the partners raise an eyebrow. Just slightly. The youngest one, the numbers guy. He had a tablet in his lap and had just opened a mirror of the file. He paused, probably trying to cross-check the reclass history with the audit index. I almost felt sorry for Greg. Almost. Inside the room, Greg pointed at one of the graphs. Big upward swoosh. Color-coded confidence. With this pivot, we're forecasting a 14% efficiency gain over baseline. Was using words like efficiency and agility to paper over the fact that he'd rerouted restricted reserves and disguised it as unlocked capital. I refreshed the clause log. The trigger's preliminary flags had hit our legal middleware. Next stop, enforcement. I took a breath, slow, even my tea was cold. My fingers rested gently on the keyboard, not typing, just feeling. Greg gestured again. Walked to the next slide. "We've built a runway that's lean, adaptable, fully compliant." That last word made me smile, because compliance wasn't something you claimed. It was something you proved, and Greg had just lied about both. Back when I was drafting Clause 14D, I'd fought to make sure it didn't require intent to be triggered, just action. The act of sharing misclassified financials with a legal acquisition partner was enough to launch enforcement. No need for Greg to sign off. No internal whistleblower required. No courtroom drama, just cause and effect, paper and fire. I looked back through the glass. Greg was on a roll now. His voice, muffled by the door, rose just enough for me to catch. And as you can see, our vendor liabilities are contained and already rolled into our strategic expansion model. Contained, that word again. Like he thought contracts were suggestion boxes. At 9:11 a.m., first internal alert hit our compliance server. Automatic clause enforcement initiated C-log ID. 14D 2025 Q1 breach. Right on schedule. I closed my laptop, placed it gently into my bag, smoothed the hem of my blouse, and stood up. There was nothing left to adjust, no words to prep. The dominoes were already falling. Inside that room was a man building castles on borrowed sand. Outside was the woman who'd written the tide chart, and the tide had just rolled in. The moment was surgical. Clean. No wind-up, no speech, no dramatic flourish, just me, heels clicking once against the tile as I stepped into the boardroom like a storm disguised as silence. 12 heads turned. Greg blinked first. Barbara, we're in the middle of..." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I pulled out my phone, tapped once. Sent. That's it. One word, flat, clipped. Final. Greg scoffed, his voice trying to land somewhere between annoyed and amused. "What now? You forwarding us another one of your archived memos?" He chuckled toward the partners like we were all in on the joke, but no one laughed. The youngest partner, the one with the tablet, had frozen mid-scroll. His jaw tightened. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Barbara, seriously." "This isn't..." A soft tone interrupted him. Not loud, not dramatic. But from across the room, one of the partners' phones buzzed. Then the other. Then Marvin from legal stepped in through the side door, face the color of raw oatmeal. He wasn't supposed to be here. Don't say another word, Marvin said, voice sharp and low. Greg, stop presenting. Everyone, stop talking. Greg blinked, confused. What the hell are you? But Marvin wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me, not with suspicion, with something closer to awe and a tinge of fear, because he'd just opened the email. Subject line: Clause 14D enforcement conditions met finalized breach notification recipients. Marvin Legal, Acquisition Partner Group External, Internal Compliance, Shadow alias attached, attachments. Audit Log 14D Breach SIP, Contract Renewal 2019, Clause 14D signed PDF, Screen Capture Approval Sequence MOV Message Body. As discussed, trigger executed upon presentation of misclassified reserves to legal partner. Seizure clause active. Best, Barbara. Greg laughed again, brittle now. What is this? What clause? What are you talking about? The youngest partner closed his tablet, looked at the lead partner and said, I need to pause this meeting. We've just been alerted to a contractual breach involving financial misrepresentation. The words hit like a detonated firework wrapped in legalese. Greg's face collapsed in stages, first confusion, then anger, then fear as his eyes darted between the partners and Marvin. This is insane, he barked. This is not, but Marvin stepped between him and the screen. Greg, I'm advising you to stop speaking. It was too late. Clause 14D had already done its work. Behind the scenes, the server had executed the handshake protocol with the acquisition firm's compliance system. Our shared assets, everything flagged under the vendor contracts, licensing agreements, and restricted capital had already been tagged. By 9:17 a.m., our access logs were being audited in real time. By 9:18, our escrow account had a hold notification from the external regulatory team. And by 9:19, Greg's beloved budget surplus was officially locked under contractual seizure, pending investigation. I didn't sit down. I didn't speak again. I just turned, slow and deliberate, and walked toward the glass door. I could hear Greg's voice behind me flailing, demanding someone explain what was happening. No one answered, because I already had, with one word, one tap, sent. The door slammed open like it had been kicked by fate itself. Everyone turned. Marvin, our own lawyer, the man who once needed 3 tries to find the Zoom mute button, was standing there, pale as drywall dust, folder clenched in one hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. Stop talking, he barked. All of you. Stop talking right now. Every head in the room snapped toward him. Greg froze mid-sentence, hand still hovering over his laser pointer like he'd just been caught holding a live grenade. What are you, Marvin? What's going on? But Marvin wasn't looking at Greg. He was scanning the room, eyes wide, pulse visible in his temple. Executing the clause, he said breathlessly. Right now. Clause 14D, it's already in process. I didn't think she'd actually, he looked at me. No accusation, no confusion, just stunned recognition. That's when the room turned. The lead acquisition partner stood, tablet clenched tight. We just received an alert from our legal team. Your firm has triggered a compliance clause that transfers control of all misrepresented assets under breach terms. Greg stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of consequences. That can't be real. That's not, we never signed anything like that. You did, I said quietly, stepping back into the room. Greg looked at me like I'd pulled a revolver from my blazer. You, what the hell is this, Barbara? I met his eyes with a stare that could have iced over a furnace. It's the clause you never bothered to read. The one you let Kylie delete from the briefing packet. The one I wrote. He blinked, mouth agape. He was trying to remember if Clause 14D had ever passed across his desk. It had, dozens of times. But Greg had never read past the bold text and pie charts. Around us, chaos bloomed. An executive in HR gasped, grabbing her phone. Someone from procurement whispered, wait, she wrote that clause? Like I was a character from a ghost story suddenly materializing in front of them. The screen behind Greg flickered. Shared access to our financial systems dimmed as real-time restrictions began to propagate. Partner accounts were sealed. Vendor contracts froze. Legal compliance dashboards turned red, one by one. Greg stumbled backward, fingers tapping the table like he could hit undo fast enough to erase his own idiocy. You don't understand, he said, voice rising in pitch. That surplus was just a presentation tool. No money moved, we were just trying to make it look stable. The youngest partner scoffed. You're admitting that on record? Greg paled. I stood in the eye of it all, still, composed, unmoved as the storm spun around me. They were drowning in the waves I'd mapped out 3 years ago when I wrote the clause and told myself, this will never happen, but if it does, it better hit like Judgment Day. Kylie whispered something about calling IT. One of the execs was already dialing their assistant. Another had left the room entirely, possibly to throw up or cry. Greg pointed at me like a child blaming a broken lamp. She did this. She set us up. No, I said, picking up my coat. You set yourself up. I just reminded the system what you signed. Then I paused, glanced over my shoulder as Marvin stumbled to catch his breath. You all forgot who wrote the rules, I said, and the system doesn't care who smiles while breaking them. It only cares that they're broken. Greg looked like he wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. He was too late to bargain, too stupid to understand how thoroughly he'd been outplayed, and too arrogant to see it coming. They weren't watching a meltdown. They were watching a reckoning. The room died mid-sentence. 1 second, the lead partner was mid-word, licensing, and the next, his laptop let out a quiet ding. Then another. 3 more in sequence, like a funeral march composed by a compliance server. Every executive's device lit up with mirrored notifications. Subject: Asset Seizure Confirmation Clause 14D triggered attachments. Seizure schedule, vendor lockdown order, pending legal action status. In progress, the projector behind Greg went black. No warning, just gone. And with it, so was access to the budget file he had so proudly flaunted all morning. Someone gasped. A VP muttered, "Oh my God," like it was a prayer or a curse. Maybe both. Greg's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Just a soft rasp like his throat had finally learned how to feel regret. The acquisition team stood slowly, almost in unison. "We'll be in touch through legal," the lead partner said, his tone professional, but colder than concrete. "But as of this moment, our interest is paused. Pending breach review." Youngest one didn't even look at Greg as he closed his tablet. He looked at me, and he nodded. The 3 of them filed out without another word, suit jackets unwrinkled, steps light. They weren't angry, they weren't surprised, they were disappointed. And that was worse. Inside the room, HR was whispering frantically into a phone. One of the directors was texting someone with shaking fingers. The CFO was pale and sweating, muttering to herself as if doing math might fix this. Arvin walked over to the corner, dialed a number. His only words were, "Yes, we'll need breach counsel, all of them." Greg stood alone at the front of the room, laser pointer still clutched in his hand like it might fire back at the truth. His eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone, to tell him this wasn't real. "Wait, my bonus," he muttered, like he'd only just remembered. "This wasn't malicious. I didn't mean to misrepresent." Marvin raised a hand without looking up. "Per policy, your bonus is suspended pending review. Retroactively." Greg flinched like he'd been slapped. I buttoned my coat. Smooth, calm. It was drizzling outside, according to the window. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough to feel cinematic. The kind of weather that makes a clean exit feel like the closing shot of something important. Greg turned to me as I reached the door. "You don't get to win, Barbara," he said, voice hoarse and bitter, like he'd been eating sand for breakfast. "You don't get to come out of this a hero." I stopped, just once. Looked him in the eye, level and steady. "I'm not winning," I said. "I'm just watching you lose." He blinked. His face twisted, like he wanted to spit something clever but couldn't find words in the ash heap of his ruined narrative, so I left him there, among the silence and the shuffling and the wreckage of his own hubris. No applause, no revenge monologue. Just the scent of toner, fear, and the slow tick of systemic collapse. Because the truth didn't need to scream. It just needed to be written in fine print, waiting, watching, ready. And all it took to enforce it was one tap. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.